Howdy, my name is Vashlos, and these are the boys. This is my guide for Ancestral Protector Hierophant. So, you may be wondering, why Ancestral Protector? Well, if you've been paying attention to the channel prior to this video, you would know that we've been messing around with Leap Slam totems and Earthbreaker support. Ultimately, I decided this wasn't going to work, not only because damage wasn't there, but Earthbreaker support is working against us in terms of attack speed. Not to mention, there's a couple of support gems that we would just absolutely love to use with Leap Slam totems, such as Multi-Strike, but it's just not possible. It sounds like it would, but you can't. That failure resulted in us looking towards other options. Those other options were Vaal Ancestral Warchief, which we had done before, didn't want to do that again. It's like one of the first builds I'd ever played. And that led to Ancestral Protectors. I don't really play strike skills all that often. The attack speed on these things is insane. What's not to like? Question on my mind though for these was map clear. They are single target, and they're traditionally only used as a buff. Luckily, non-Vaal strike skills, strike an additional nearby enemy sounds like it could potentially solve that AoE problem for us. And it did, resulting in a bit of a speed mapper. And Conviction of Power also provides an interesting defensive layer for us. Normally, we would use a belt called Arn's Anguish and gain triple damage via transforming our endurance charges over towards brutal charges. But this time, I decided to use Conviction of Power in a different way, via a belt called Graven's Secret. It comes from the same boss, Maven, and instead of transforming endurance charges, it transforms your power charges over towards absorption charges. Absorption charges recuperate a portion of elemental damage taken as energy shield. This is quite nice as we don't really have a way to sustain energy shield in any other way from our build. Beyond this, the building blocks of this character are extremely simple. You really only need Wilma's and Rakiata's Dance, and from there, it's a sandbox. You can do whatever you'd like. For me personally, I think I've been drawn to this specifically because it reminds me of Zeal in Diablo 2. If you're not familiar with me, I grew up playing an absolute plethora of that game, and a Zealer was one of my favorite. Let's talk about friction, shall we? Some of the cons of this build are you're using totems. Some people just inherently don't like totems. I can't really help with that, but it is something that you should be aware of. This is a totem build. Not the best bosser due to range limitations. We stack a lot of melee strike range. In fact, we stack as much of it as we possibly can without, sacrificing something else that we desperately need. And we still really don't feel like we have enough. You could get an alternate quality Ancestral Protector where they stay active at a further range, and that could possibly solve this pain point, but I didn't really want to give up Phantasmal Ancestral Protector and all that additional buff effect. Sometimes we're so fast that it's honestly difficult to pilot our character. We will, hold down Leap Slam, and then we'll use it 3 or 4 times accidentally if you have on a Shrine. Not gonna lie, if you want to do exactly what I've done in this guide, you should expect to spend quite a few Divine Orbs. It is expensive to min-max, but to get going it's very, very cheap. Like I said, you really only need 2 items. And unfortunately, unlike other totems such as Ballista, we only have 5 maximum totems. Kind of a bummer. I wish we had more, and I honestly wish they behaved the same way as Ballista. Let's talk about those building blocks that I've mentioned a couple of times now. The first would be Rakiata's Dance, and the other, Wilma's Requital. What we find most valuable out of Rakiata's Dance is that it treats enemy monster elemental resistance values as inverted. Wilma's Requital, what we find valuable is that the modifier increases and reductions to cast speed applied to attack speed is incredibly powerful for us. Not to mention, Wilma's Requital also offers us accuracy rating and increased elemental damage with attack skills, both of which are very handsome stats for our plans. that is it. Those are the only two items I would say are 100% mandatory. Everything else is arguable. You could absolutely take this build in a different direction than I did, and I would be excited to see if you had any success doing so. So fret not if something looks a little bit too expensive. Play around, see what's available at a cheaper price, and maybe you might even stumble upon something far better than I've recommended here. Now that some of the formalities are out of the way, I would like to include a section that showcases the abilities that I've included for this character. We'll start off with our main damage ability, and that would be Ancestral Protector. We put this skill within our two-handed sword, Rakiata's Dance, and the support gems that we attach to it are faster attacks, awakened elemental damage with attack support, awakened multi-strike, multiple totem support, and volatility. You may look at multiple totem support and say, well, that has a less damage multiplier, couldn't I fit in something a little bit better? And the answer is, not really. We beat out the less damage multiplier due to having 5 totems. That's 25% more damage, so we actually have 4% more, even though using this. And then with 2 additional totems, we can cover a lot more area. So I think this is actually optimal. The next skill in our setup I would like to discuss is our curse. Punishment. First off, we're using punishment because there's not really that many other good options for us in terms of curse. The marks don't offer us anything, such as Sniper's Mark, we don't use projectiles. Assassin's Mark, we don't use crits. And then Warlord's Mark, we can't gain endurance charges or any of the on-hit effects from that target being hit. Same goes for Poacher's Mark. We can't gain those frenzy charges from those targets dying to our totems. So punishment it is. It offers us somewhat of an offensive capability, and then it also offers us the ability to debilitate targets that hit us. The reason why we use traps is because our curse cannot be reflected to us this way. Traps also provide us the opportunity to gain power charges and frenzy charges for free off of enemies triggering them. To increase the likelihood of this, we include cluster trap support and divergent trap support. Divergent trap support increases trap trigger area of effect without us having to invest anywhere on our passive tree. And then if we quality charge traps, we get some additional trap throwing speed. Anomalous cluster trap support also provides some of the same. Next, we're going to talk about Smite. Smite is a strike skill as well, but we use it as a buff and a rage engine. What I mean by that is that Smite grants us a flat amount of lightning damage, which is very much appreciated. It lasts for about 4 seconds, and then if we grab ourselves a Phantasmal Smite, this aura also grants us 5% increased attack speed and cast speed, so 10% in total for us. Can be pretty expensive though. So it gives us this aura, right? But the other half of it is the rage engine. We turn it into a rage engine by slapping on rage support. Before you get yourself divergent rage support, it won't be nearly as easy to obtain 60 rage stacks. But as you can see, I can just sit here and spam my ability and I'll get rage passively. I'm not going to say that you should, go into every boss fight with 60 rage, but you may find yourself doing so just because of how easy it is to maintain once you get yourself a divergent support version. Other than that, throw on Culling Strike so that the things you do hit when they're near 10% life or lower, they die immediately, thus increasing your DPS, and then slap on a multi-strike to make that a little bit easier, as well as generating rage a lot more comfortable, maintaining the aura a lot more comfortable. Multi-strike also helps us apply Maim and Blind, which we gain through tattoos on our passive tree. Now that we have discussed some of the more important skills within our links, I would like to discuss, last but not least, our movement skill, our cast when damage taken setup, and our auras. First, cast when damage taken should be linked to Molten Shell. Molten Shell should be a level 19. Reason being is that we really don't have that much life. We get +1 level from our global modifiers, just keep that in mind, so it's actually level 18. It's where you want it to be, is that will keep it at level 64, and then you keep cast when damage taken at level 64 as well. Why do we do this? Well, it's because 1,980 total damage from hits is roughly, 60% of our life. The higher we raise cast when damage taken, the less likely we're actually going to survive due to cast when damage taken not actually proccing. So keep an eye on that number. I'm not saying you have to have it at level 14, but you need to know that this is a very delicate relationship between how much life you actually have and how much life this support gem wants from you. I'll leave it at that. Leap Slam, it's the only movement skill we use, and honestly I think it's the only one we need. There's not much else to be said. You really don't even want faster attacks attached to this thing. You're going to fly off the map at that rate. And then let's discuss auras. We use quite a few. Purity of Elements, Haste, Animalis Precision, Grace, Determination, and then let's not forget Smite. We've already talked about Rakiata's Dance and Wilma's Requital. Now let's talk about the rest of our items. First is Time Clasp. I recommend get one with as much attack speed and cast speed as you can. Try to get increased skill effect duration rather than reduced, and then raise those damage taken, recouped as mana and life modifiers as high as you can get it as well. Unaffected by temporal chains is icing on the cake. It's the cherry on top. And you can corrupt these relatively easily due to how available they are for the implicit that you see here. 14% to all elemental resistances. I believe it can go from 14% to 16%. Next we'll talk about our gloves. I'm using a rare pair of gloves. In a build that's similar to this one, my Artillery Ballista Hierophant, we use Abhorrent Interrogations so that we can apply Wither and increase that target's elemental damage taken. We can't really do that here. We need to get our spell suppression from somewhere, and I've chosen to get it from a tier 1 modifier and then a grand implicit from Eater of Worlds. Other than that, we wanted a little bit of chaos resistance, and we wanted melee strike range from crafting it on the bench. The other implicit that you're seeing is a large reason why we've chosen these gloves as well. Non-vol strike skills, as I mentioned in the introduction, is an incredibly important stat for us to clear maps in a timely manner. I wouldn't worry too much about the enchantment you see here. The only one I ever really care about is Commandment of Light on gloves. Attack speed is powerful, as always. Graven's Secret, it's a cloth belt, normally has stun recovery rate, something like that. We also try to corrupt this for all elemental resistances implicit. Not as available, but still not as expensive as you would think. The reason why we use Graven's Secret is that it transforms the power charges we are guaranteed from Conviction of Power into absorption charges. And if I look at increased description here, players recoup 12% of elemental damage taken as energy shield per absorption charge. That's incredibly powerful. Since we gain power charges from charged trap supports, we get 5 no problem. Thus making it so we recoup 60% of elemental damage on hit. It's very nice. And when I put this belt on, it almost felt night and day in terms of survivability. Before we were using an Arn's Anguish, and while that does hold water against content like Sanctum, where you just want as much damage as you can possibly stomach, while you're leveling, heavily consider Graven's Secret. I would say that this belt is the one that makes the most sense for what I've done, and you might be surprised about how much you love playing with absorption charges. Bubonic Trail are a pair of boots that I've recently fallen in love with due to exploring content from other creators. So I've decided to adopt it for this build as well. And the reason being is the stat that you see at the bottom there. Increased reservation efficiency of skills while affected by a unique Abyss Jewel. That is the only stat I care about other than the Abyssal Socket and the suppressed spell damage. But the suppressed spell damage isn't really unique to these boots, and it's more of a cherry on top due to finding a nice pair available on Tradeside. We use Tekrod's Gaze to enable that modifier. We don't really benefit from it in any other way. Before we were using Elemental Overload, and we kind of benefited from it, but that seemed to have been an overinvestment as well. So feel free to experiment with this part. Other than that, the enchant, I would say, is non-negotiable. Due to taking Precise Technique, I was about to go and search for it, we can't deal critical strikes. We don't want to. In fact, I would much prefer having that 40% damage constantly rather than intermittently, even if we are attacking that fast and it could be constant. It was costing us more skill points. So in order to gain the inherent ability to shock and freeze our targets, Ignite is kind of tertiary. We don't really care that much about it since our hits aren't large. But we do care about that shock. So enchant your boots with this modifier. 10% chance to freeze, shock, and ignite if you haven't crit recently. As for a ring, I would recommend a rare ring, and you should make it an amethyst for that additional chaos resistance. Doesn't have to be exactly like this, but I would recommend a high fire and cold resistance to work alongside that lightning resistance that Graven's Secret grants you. If you would like to go Arn's Anguish, then go ahead and swap over fire resistance to lightning resistance on a ring like this, because you won't need that lightning resistance. You'll need fire. Other than that, mana regenerated per second so that we can benefit from our Ascendancy a little bit better, and then non-channeling skills have lower cost to make using our skills a little more fluid. We use a warped timepiece because we love attack speed so much. It also gives us a movement speed, and we anoint that with Charisma for additional reservation efficiency. The dexterity is actually mandatory, and you cannot corrupt this. Otherwise, you would need to change around your tattoos a little bit, which I didn't really feel like doing. That is a reasonable amount of dexterity, and one tattoo can be pretty powerful. Our chest piece is a Skin of the Lords with Divine Shield. A lot of you are going to look at this and be like, okay, well that's too expensive for me, and you'd probably be right. I don't expect you to replicate this, but I do want you to know Skin of the Lords is incredibly powerful when paired with Enlighten, because it raises it to a level 6 Enlighten. So it doesn't have to be Divine Shield. It could be Iron Reflexes to save you a skill point, or something else, just as long as it doesn't brick your build or another part of your defensive layers. It doesn't even have to be a Skin of the Lords. This is a pretty late game item, and all of your gems within it have to be corrupted. So play around. There are plenty of unique chest pieces out there. You could even use a rare one and solve a lot of the problems we face much more simply, much more cheaply. But I want to show you what my in-game choices look like, and that would be a Skin of the Lords. Furthermore, on alternative choices, if you don't have a rare ring, I would recommend the Taming. The Taming is a really nice ring, and it provides just about everything you could hope for, damage and resistances, until you can craft something a little bit more serviceable. As for our flasks, I'm going to go over them one by one as to what you see on my belt, and then I'm going to discuss what you could actually do. So, get yourself a Seething Divine Flask of Assuaging. This will make it an instant recovery, and it'll also grant you immunity to bleeding if used while bleeding. Taste of Hate gives you that coveted physical damage taken as elemental, and that also gives you a portion of your physical gained as extra cold. This is a staple for a lot of the builds I use. Highly recommended. Ruby Flask and Topaz Flask. You don't have to go with those prefixes, it's what I chose to go with, but you do want cast speed and attack speed if you choose to do this. It's the stats we care most about, after all. And then that final one, Forbidden Taste. It's a quartz flask, and we don't really care about the suppression from this because we don't want to use it. We only want to use this when we take a savage hit, as you can see, used when you take a savage hit on that implicit there via an instilling orb, and we recover 100% of our life when this is used. It's incredibly powerful if you're able to cap your chaos resistance, as you take 25% of your maximum life per second as chaos damage. Sounds like a lot, but since we only have 3,000, it's really not that much, especially with maximum chaos resistance. It's a very powerful defensive layer. I recommend you try it sometime. Now let's go on to flasks that you could use if you don't have capped chaos resistance, or if you don't want to use a ruby or topaz flask. You can use a sulfur flask. You can use a granite flask, a jade flask, amethyst, or even an At-Series Promise amethyst flask. All of these are viable options. I think there's a few more, but these are what I found myself thinking about most often when wanting to replace anything that you see up here I'm actually using. I almost forgot to talk about your Pantheon gods. So while you're leveling, you'll take Soul of the Brine King so that you can avoid freezes and mitigate stuns. And then Soul of Ralakesh will help lessen the pain that bleeds inflict upon you until you gain bleed immunity from your Warrior's Tale and tattoos. But once you do so, you can change Ralakesh over to Soul of Aberath to make farming Searing Exarch maps a lot more enjoyable. And then you can change Soul of the Brine King over, once you get Unwavering Stance, to Soul of Lunaris for additional movement speed, physical damage reduction, and an avoidance layer. We are now going to get into the path of building side of things, and we're going to start off with our Ascendancy. We choose Pursuit of Faith, Ritual of Awakening, Conviction of Power, and Divine Guidance. You want to know what that order looks like. Pursuit of Faith, Ritual of Awakening, Conviction of Power, and Divine Guidance. After that, I've included some passive trees for you. There's the end game, which you're seeing now. There's the late game. And then there's some leveling trees. I've included an Ancestral Protector leveling tree, but I want to let you know, this isn't what I leveled as. I chose to level as Armageddon Brand, and then made my swap at around level 60. I wasn't sure if Armageddon Brand was the right choice either, so I've also included a tertiary leveling tree for Stormbrand. The final tree I've included is called Blank Canvas, and the purpose behind this one is to take out all of the expensive items that I didn't think completely necessary, or at least completely obtainable. And I did leave in some of the jewels that you should prioritize, such as Warrior's Tale for your bleed immunity, and then Elegant Hubris, so that you can equip all of your items without worry. This can also be shown over in the item set. If you look here, Blank Canvas, there's a bunch of items missing, and that's on purpose. It's so that you can supplant whatever you so may choose or need in those item slots, as it will certainly be different if you don't have exactly what I have. But don't worry, I've also included examples pretty close to what I've got as well. There's the late game tree item set, which will have a lot of the corrupted implicits removed from the gear. And then the endgame tree, which is a one-for-one mirror of what I'm doing in game. Don't forget, there's the passive tree down here for your jewels, and you should have it matched to the correct item set. I hope you'll give this build a try, Exiles. This is easily one of the most fun builds I think I've ever made. And I'm not saying that lightly. We are really fast, our damage is undeniable. There's no defensive stat in the game besides cycling damage reduction and just the monster having more life that is going to get in your way of completing that encounter in a timely manner. And not to mention, this build happened off of a happy accident. We were messing around with what was known to be a meme. We knew it was a meme. Leap Slam Totems. If you're taking that one seriously, I don't know how to help you. I'm sorry. But, you know, ultimately it led to us trying out different things. And we landed on something we had never tried before, Ancestral Protector. Rakiata's Dance is as cool of a sword as it looks. Not only do I hope that they keep making in-game art like this, I hope they keep designing items like this. It feels as if it were specifically made for underdog builds that don't really have as many of the multipliers that other skills have available to them. that is it. Thanks for tuning in. You guys are awesome. You didn't have to go out of your way to listen to me ramble for that long. You didn't have to take time out of your day, but you did, and I thank you for it. Other than that, down below I'm going to leave you a couple of links. The first is, of course, going to be that Path of Building link, so that you can import all of this juicy information over towards your relevant app. Next would be Path of Exile Ninja, so that in case you don't have access to POB, you can go and check out my character over there. Next, I'm going to leave a link towards my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Fashsalos, and I hope you'll come and see me sometime. I stream every day, usually for 4 hours to 7 hours. The final link, it's going to be towards my Discord server. I'm trying to start a community, and I hope to see you there sometime. It's going to be the place you'll best be in tune with when I plan on going live on that Twitch channel. Wakarayu Watuahu, Exiles. Stay safe and Rayclast. I'll see you in the next one. See you.